In 2025, Earth was overtaken by aliens. This day, now known as the Arrival, saw the construction of massive walls, up to 30 stories high, that enclosed every city and nation across the globe. Nearly a year later, residents of Los Angeles live under a regime of military occupation by an organization known as the Transitional Authority, which is made up of humans who serve the extraterrestrial group known only as the hosts. One day, Will says goodbye to his wife Katie and their children, Grace and Bram, before heading to his job as a mechanic. Later, he talks with his colleague Carlos, and it becomes clear that Will is planning to illegally smuggle himself beyond the wall. Soon, Will meets with his contact, and the two of them hide in a container in the back of a truck. Will reveals to the smuggler that he's crossing the wall in search of his 12-year-old son Charlie, whom he was separated from during the arrival. The truck nearly makes it through the checkpoint before an explosion destroys the entire area. Dazed, Will crawls out of the flipped-over truck and is then arrested by a squad of military police officers known as Homeland Security, also referred to as Red Hats. Elsewhere, Katie goes to an underground dealer for forbidden insulin, since the hosts have outlawed drugs like insulin to weed out the population. She trades with a bottle of alcohol but finds the insulin spoiled, so Katie is forced to pull out a pistol to leave with the bottle unharmed. If a drone catches her with a gun, she could get everyone nearby killed. But Katie can't afford to be robbed. That night, Katie's sister Maddie arrives at her house with her son, who needed the insulin. Katie assures her she'll find another way to get the medication, but asks Maddie to watch the kids as she leaves to find Will, who hasn't come home yet. Katie speaks with Carlos, who lies about not knowing Will's whereabouts. Suddenly, the curfew siren blares across the city, causing everyone still outside to scatter. Katie hides under a military truck as a drone hovers above, and a prisoner is shoved into the vehicle. Fortunately, Katie isn't spotted, and she makes it home safely. The following day, Katie informs her friend Eric Broussard about Will. Eric advises her to check the hospital while he makes some calls. She arrives at the hospital, which is in total chaos due to yesterday's explosion. Amidst the chaos, Katie sneaks into a storeroom, steals several vials of insulin from a fridge, and then leaves upon learning that Will isn't there. In the detention center, a squad of soldiers led by Captain Lagarza arrives to escort Will to the Green Zone, where human leaders and other individuals still deemed important reside. Once there, Will is taken to meet Alan Snyder, the proxy governor of Los Angeles. Snyder reveals that he knows Will's real name is not Billy Sullivan, but Will Bowman, and he is also aware of Will's military and FBI background. Will had to hide his true identity to protect himself and his family from the authority. Knowing this, Snyder begins blackmailing Will to work for him by infiltrating the resistance to capture and turn in their leader, Geronimo. Snyder tries to persuade Will further by telling him that if he refuses, his family will be sent to the factory. Will is returned home by the Red Hats in the middle of the night, frightening his family, but Will reassures them that he was just in an accident. Katie, however, realizes her husband isn't being completely honest, and they later talk in private. Upon hearing that he went to look for Charlie, Katie cries, but the news of Snyder's proposal enrages her. She would never become the wife of a collaborator. In the morning, the family is woken up by the smell of bacon, and upon entering the kitchen, they find Snyder there. He has prepared breakfast and even brewed coffee, which is now impossible to find. As he eats, Snyder lists the benefits of the family's new status, such as private security and a personal tutor for the children. Additionally, Snyder says he's convinced the host to begin reopening recreational buildings, including Katie's old bar. However, Will is only willing to agree in exchange for the return of their son Charlie, who is in another block. Snyder promises to consider this option, and so Will reluctantly agrees to the deal. The next morning, Katie goes to a house that doubles as a secret hideout for the resistance and informs them that Will has been hired by the host to hunt them down. Unbeknownst to Will, this includes his wife Katie as well. The following day, Will goes to his new job to meet his new co-workers. He meets Phyllis, his new boss, and realizes that Snyder lied about putting him in charge. He also meets Bo, an old policeman, and his new partner, as he's sent out to look for Andrew Hines, the man who planted the bomb from the checkpoint explosion. Katie returns to her old bar, the Yonk. She finds a box of old pictures and other important memories. Eric arrives to tell Katie that they need her to get them information about how close the Red Hats are to finding the crew responsible for the bombing. Will and Bo go to the apartment of Andrew Hines' girlfriend. She says that he's not here, but Will succeeds in scaring Andrew out of hiding anyway. Will chases Andrew around the apartment complex, including crawling out onto a support beam, before eventually catching him. As Will puts Andrew into the back of his car, he and Bo come face to face with a transitional authority drone. Will takes Andrew into holding and is shocked to find Carlos, who was arrested this morning over helping Will steal the energy cells Will used as payment to be taken across the wall. Carlos is rightfully angry with Will for getting him caught, so Will promises to find his wife and son, Lucia and Mateo, and to set him free. Will goes to Carlos's trailer but is unable to find his family. Fortunately, when he goes home to tell Katie about them, she reveals that she's already hiding Lucia and Mateo. Katie tries to get Eric and the Resistance to help them disappear, but they don't have the resources. This forces Will and Katie to see Erect, the man who helped make the fake IDs for Will's family in the past. Will and Katie then take Lucia and Mateo to hide in an underground community of people who, like them, are hiding from the authorities' retribution. Katie later goes to meet Eric and another man in a park, informing them that the occupation has arrested the bomber and will use him to find the rest of the cell. The unknown man says the Resistance is close to executing a plan that could do meaningful damage, and asks Katie to find out the location of this other cell. Will is unable to save Carlos in time and meets him on the bus that's leaving for the factory to tell him his family is safe. Carlos bitterly tells Will that at least his family still has their father. Later, Will is drinking away his regret at home when Bo calls on his radio to tell him they found Andrew's associates. Katie overhears this and rushes to a phone to tell Eric. When Will, Bo, and some red hats arrive at the location, all they find is a pile of corpses with the word Geronimo painted on the wall behind them. Will realizes there's a spy within Homeland Security. Carlos and other civilians are taken to the factory. They are forced to strip naked and are sent into a strange hallway that blinds them with a bright light while a shrill electronic noise roars in their ears. Afterwards, Carlos and the others are wearing medical gowns and masks as they walk into a bright light. The next morning, a man with a cart enters an inconspicuous building to transmit a radio broadcast calling for the overthrow of the occupation, seemingly voiced by Geronimo. The Red Hats arrive to arrest the person broadcasting, but nobody is there. At the same time, Bram records the broadcast on a cassette and hides it with other recordings in his closet. Elsewhere, Katie participates in an armed resistance attack on a food truck protected by Red Hats. During the operation, one of their comrades, Jason Kim, is shot and badly wounded. Katie tries to help him, but Eric says he's too far gone before executing him, shocking Katie. Drones arrive and gun down anyone still looting the truck. The point of the attack was to calculate the authorities' response time to incidents. Katie rushes home and barely manages to wash the blood off of her before Will asks what's wrong, but Katie doesn't answer. At school, Bram gives the cassette to his teacher, who says he briefly saw a huge object circling low orbit the other night and now intends to build a larger telescope. Meanwhile, Homeland Security investigates the truck, and Will reports to Phyllis that whoever did this left behind a body that appears to have been executed. Phyllis orders them to uncover his true identity. After identifying the body as Jason Kim, the Red Hats arrest Jason's parents and search his bedroom, where they find a number cipher. Will is upset that Jason's parents are taken away despite being uninvolved. Eric watches from the crowd before heading to a resistance base to report what happened. Worried that Jason left traces behind, the older man from before, Alexander Quayle, asks Eric to see if Katie knows anything. Will then returns home, where Katie continues to avoid the truth by attributing her odd behavior to a box of memories she found in the bar which belonged to Charlie. Distraught, Will blames himself for being powerless against their masters. Katie briefly comforts him before leaving to meet Eric in the park. Eric justifies his actions as saving Jason from torture. He ignores Katie's feelings of guilt and tells her she needs to extract everything her husband has learned during the investigation from him. Elsewhere, Bram's friend Pia asks for his help and leads him to an underground tunnel beneath the wall, where her cousin Pedro fell and injured his leg. Bram helps his friends home as they explain they've been going to the other side of the wall for 6 months to steal food and that there aren't any other people beyond the wall. After learning about Jason Kim's past, Will and Bo leave to investigate places Jason visited. They go to an old community center, which they realize is a resistance base after finding a firing range and a weapons cache. Later, Eric informs Alexander about the lost weapons, and he orders Eric to tell Katie that her intel needs to outweigh the damage done by Will. Eric fulfills the request, leaving Katie concerned about her family's safety. Nevertheless, in the evening, Katie and Will open the bar to visitors. Suddenly, amid the festivities, Snyder walks in. He congratulates everyone on the reopening of the Yonk, then explains to Will that by reopening recreational establishments like this, the hosts are allowing people to safely release some tension. After hearing this, Katie becomes furious, thinking they've sold out to the aliens for the sake of trying to get Charlie back. But Will is convinced that by continuing to work for Snyder, he will be able to find their son. Meanwhile, as Will and Bo discuss who might be leaking intel, Eric returns to the bar. Katie tells him that she just learned of a huge database of information from before the arrival, and of a woman who knows how to manipulate it, which is how they found the base so quickly. Katie will only reveal the woman's name if Eric promises that Will won't ever be harmed. Eric swears to uphold the deal. Sometime later, a squad of Red Hats brutally arrest a school teacher and assault a student. After the raid, it is revealed that Eric was one of the soldiers. Later, Eric explains to Alexander that he's learning the daily schedule of the Red Hats, which they hope to soon use to their advantage. At Homeland Security, Phyllis shows Will information about the Los Angeles rebels. She believes that if the rebels unite and go on the offensive, it will do more harm to other humans than to the hosts, hoping that Will can see the threat the resistance poses. Meanwhile, Katie sends the kids to the park with Lindsay, the private tutor appointed by Snyder. When they leave, Katie turns on the porch light, which acts as a signal for someone to throw a Molotov through a window, setting the house on fire. Katie counts to 10 before she puts the fire out and calls emergency services. Will and the Red Hats arrive, and Will is outraged to find that his house is being searched, but that's just the protocol. Will grows suspicious that Jennifer, his co-worker, is the resistance mole, which causes a heated argument between them, but Bo quickly calms them down. Katie is asked to go to Phyllis for interrogation, who promises the family enhanced security, as the neighbors are being warned that if something happens to her family, they will be held responsible. Katie is shocked, as now they will be feared. Phyllis interrogates her about the attack and even the details of her marriage. Meanwhile, as Katie is being interrogated, Maddie arrives in the green zone. Having owned an art gallery before the arrival, she uses her experience to apply for an assistant's job from the colony job pool. This leads her to meet Charlotte Burgess, who is responsible for preserving and distributing expensive artworks in the colony, and quickly puts Maddie to work. After the interrogation, Will confronts Phyllis, but she shows him a box of cassettes with recordings of Geronimo's anti-regime radio broadcasts found in Bram's room. For now, she'll hold on to this evidence and advises Will to keep an eye on his son. Furious, Will drives home, and after a tough conversation, Bram shows his father a resistance poster. Their appearance in the city signals an upcoming broadcast by Geronimo. Elsewhere, Katie manages to extract a promise from Alexander not to harm her husband, and in return identifies her husband's boss, Phyllis, in a photo. Later, another Geronimo broadcast begins. Using what Will learned, the Red Hats immediately detect the signal coming from a library and rush there. The man hears their approach but utters his final words, calling for resistance. He is arrested and taken to a secret interrogation room below the station, although Will is sure it's not Geronimo, greatly disappointing Snyder, who had already informed the masters of their victory. The arrested man confesses and tells the authority where he got the scripts for the broadcasts. They search the site and find a delivery system inside a pipe that leads into the green zone. Later that day, Will tells Phyllis he believes Geronimo is in the green zone. Phyllis then informs Will that as a sign of trust, she destroyed his son's tapes. Meanwhile, Maddie has finished her filing and overhears Charlotte and an assistant worrying about lacking an important art piece for a client. She intervenes, revealing her knowledge of a valuable art collection from her pre-arrival gallery work, capturing Charlotte's interest. Impressed that Maddie's lead turned out to be accurate, Charlotte asks if she knows about any other art collections. Maddie is willing to tell in return for a job and a guaranteed insulin supply for her son. Charlotte agrees immediately. After Charlotte departs, her husband, Nolan Burgess, arrives and shows a clear attraction to Maddie. She responds politely, subtly teasing as she bends over to pick up her bag before leaving. Will returns home, where Bram admits he listened to Geronimo because he was the only one who instilled hope in people. Katie arrives at the Yonk and finds Phyllis inside, who wants to talk to her alone. Phyllis talks about her husband and draws parallels with Will, who loves his wife so much that he doesn't see who she really is. She shows surveillance photos from the truck attack site and warns Katie that she's gotten involved with the wrong people, and tells Katie that she now works for her. Phyllis returns home where her paralyzed husband lies. She greets him, but upon entering the living room, she finds Eric Broussard waiting in the shadows. Phyllis immediately understands why he's here and calmly asks him to kill her husband too. Broussard shoots her, then enters the bedroom and does the same to her husband. The next day, Bo and Will arrive at the crime scene, where Jennifer shows them the word Geronimo painted on a wall. Snyder arrives, furious because Phyllis had direct communication with the hosts, which is rare. He tells the team that he wants Geronimo found, but to be discreet when looking in the green zone. A message then comes in that someone has been captured at the message delivery pipe. Will interrogates the young man, who gives him an address in the green zone. The Red Hats raid the house and Will discovers a concealed room where resistance posters are made. They arrest two people calling themselves Geronimo. Meanwhile, Pia takes Bram to explore the deserted part of LA that's outside the wall. They go to a warehouse stocked with supplies that are rare to find nowadays, where Bram finds coffee and is surprised when Pia kisses him. Back inside the wall, a news broadcast falsely announces to the city that Geronimo's forces were defeated in a violent firefight that never took place. Will meets Snyder in the interrogation room. Snyder is once again enraged that the captured couple doesn't look like terrorists, but instead, all they've done is make posters. Snyder also refuses to fulfill the agreement about searching for Charlie, since the resistance leaders are still at large. Instead, he appoints Will as the head of the unit. Now in charge, Will immediately begins searching for the mole and confronts Jennifer, who was Phyllis's assistant. But Jennifer instead reminds him of his wife, suggesting that he's the source of the leak without even knowing. With the news of Geronimo being captured, Alexander tells Katie and the other resistance fighters not to lose hope, but instead to prepare for war. Later, Will meets Katie at the Yonk and asks her for more details about her interrogation with Phyllis. But Katie continues to obscure the truth. Returning home, Will sees Bram giving Grace markers he got outside the wall. Bram lies that he traded oranges from their tree for them. Later, Snyder has a conversation with Luis Ortega, the radio broadcaster who claimed to be Geronimo. However, Snyder has discovered that Ortega is merely an actor playing the role. He then persuades Ortega to impersonate Geronimo once more, offering to send him to another colony instead of the factory in exchange. At the same time, Bram goes to his school teacher's apartment and promises to get him the lens he needs for the telescope he's working on. Elsewhere, Will secretly searches the Yonk, but finds nothing incriminating except for a book he doesn't recognize. Regardless, he returns to the Homeland office and apologizes to Jennifer. The two share a drink and exchange stories, including one about how Jennifer's fiancé, Jason, was killed in a terrorist bombing just days after the arrival. Over the next few days, the trial of Luis Ortega, or Geronimo, is broadcast on television and features testimonies from relatives of the terrorism victims. The actor plays his role, believing Snyder's promises to eradicate terrorism. Snyder personally declares him guilty, a sentence that was given to him predetermined on a teleprompter. Luis then realizes he's been deceived only mere moments before he's taken to the gallows in front of the courthouse, but can do nothing about it, and is dragged outside and executed in front of a crowd and on live television. After the execution, Snyder forcibly invites Will along with him to meet someone. At the same time, Alexander's group disguises themselves as Homeland Security and heads out on a new mission, with Katie leading the way in a delivery van. What Snyder and Will don't know is that Eric Broussard is one of their guards. As they drive, Will is upset with Snyder for killing Ortega since he wasn't really Geronimo, but Snyder argues anyone playing even a small part in the resistance is a terrorist. A decoy road worker then sends them on a detour, where Eric kills the other guards in his car, bringing the convoy to a stop. Snyder tries to get out, but Will orders him to stay in the car. The rebels, disguised as Red Hats, emerge and shoot paintballs at the car windows, blocking Will and Snyder's view before using a vehicle to rip the door off with a hook. With no cover, Will shoots at the rebels before he pushes the dead driver out of the car and drives away with Snyder. Katie announces that drones will soon arrive, prompting the rebels to flee the scene. Katie heads to the Yonk to remove and hide her disguise. Minutes later, Will arrives with Snyder, seeking refuge in the bar. Snyder is hysterical, and Will is unable to guarantee protection on his own. Katie is upset to see that Will is bleeding, but Will has to leave to find a payphone outside to call for backup. Meanwhile, upon learning about Will's role in saving Snyder, Alexander is furious. However, Katie then reports via radio that she is with Snyder in the bar. Katie returns to Snyder and they converse. He reveals that his PhD in economics helped ensure him his high position in the New World government. He mentions there are 7 more colonies in the coastal region, but he doesn't know anything beyond them, except that the land between colonies is dangerous. Will returns, telling Snyder that reinforcements are on the way. As Katie bandages Will's injury, she asks him not to interfere with Snyder's killing. However, Will reminds her that if Snyder dies, someone else will take his place, noting that Snyder is the devil they know. Soon after, Snyder reveals that his contacts have found their son Charlie in Santa Monica, and he is putting himself at risk to negotiate his return. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door, and they hide Snyder in the bathroom. It's Eric, in a Red Hat uniform, who enters and searches the place. Katie leads him to the basement, asking to ensure Will's safety, but he can't guarantee anything as her husband is always diving into the fray. However, he tells her to get Snyder out through the back door. Broussard eventually leaves, but Will is convinced he is a member of the resistance and will return with backup. They barricade the doors with Snyder, who nervously mentions Charlie again, infuriating Katie as she's tired of his blackmail. Katie tries to push Snyder out the back door, where a rebel squad awaits, but Will stops her. Erect, contacted by Alexander via radio, becomes conflicted when instructed to abandon the deal with Katie and bring out Snyder. Meanwhile, Snyder reveals to Will that the hosts have used an algorithm to filter every colonist, supposedly making it impossible for Red Hats to ever go rogue like this. Will orders Katie to hide, readying himself to defend Snyder. Then a smoke grenade is thrown in, and the militants storm in. Will takes out 2 rebels before one catches him reloading, but Katie shoots the rebel, saving Will. Erect then enters and aims at her, and Will tells her to drop the weapon. Erect then goes to the office where Snyder is hiding, but discovers that Snyder has fled on foot and chases after him. Will grabs a shotgun and gives chase as well. Captain Lagarza and other Homeland officers arrive, but Eric's already gone. Will then reveals that Snyder was actually hiding in a cupboard behind the bar. Snyder orders Will to find Erect no matter what and leaves. Later, Will tries to reassure Katie, explaining that Snyder's tribunal was just a farce. There is no people's hero, and those who attack them have no relation to Geronimo, who in reality was just a couple of street artists. Meanwhile, Erect tells Alexander he sent the remainder of the resistance into hiding, and Alexander concludes that Katie was a double agent all along. The next morning, Maddie is caught up in an intimate encounter with Nolan, with Charlotte observing closely. Meanwhile, after Katie leaves for work, Lindsay secretly gives Grace a Greatest Day book that she brought from church and tells her that she'll play an important role when the Greatest Day arrives. Katie heads to the Resistance hideout, but discovers that it's empty. She then goes to Eric's house and finds that he's also gone. At Homeland Security, Will identifies Broussard's photo, having recognized him among the attackers. Snyder demands that Broussard be found. Will, Bo, and a squad of Red Hats head to his listed address. But when the Red Hats attempt to breach the house, it explodes. Will and Bo later question Broussard's Red Hat squad mates. One of them describes a distinctive feature, a tattoo on his chest, which Will recognizes as a Marine Spec Ops tattoo. Elsewhere, Erect infiltrates a restricted area where a truck storing dead bodies resides. He steals the body of a man with a similar skin tone and build to himself. He then meets with Alexander, and they douse a van with gasoline before placing the body in the driver's seat, where Erect blows its face off using a shotgun. Alexander continues to accuse Katie of being a traitor before igniting the van, but Erect feels otherwise. Later, the authority investigates the burnt van. Bo believes the resistance is cleaning house again, similar to after the Gateway bombing at the Wall, but Will remains unconvinced. After failing to contact the resistance, Katie finally decrypts a message that leads her to a meeting place. There, Erect arrives in a car, which she enters. In the green zone, Nolan approaches Maddie in the kitchen, ignoring that there is a maid nearby. Nolan tells Maddie that he can't stop thinking about her and suggests they go to his office. However, Maddie declines, reminding him that their arrangement involves Charlotte. At Homeland Security, Jennifer uses the aliens database, filled with all pre-arrival digital information and called the Rolodex, to show Will that Eric's face is associated with 14 different identities. Will realizes that Erect isn't just ex-military, but was some kind of special operator. Erect takes Katie outside the city and asks difficult questions about her loyalty. She is reminded that she shot a fellow rebel, but Katie reminds him that he put her in that situation and that she will always put her family's safety first. She then leaves, unwilling to continue the conversation. Erect then goes to meet Rachel, another resistance member, and tells her about Alexander's order to eliminate Katie and how he thinks that he's wrong. The next day, Will meets Snyder in his new residence in the Green Zone to report what they've learned so far about Erect Broussard. Snyder admits that he has a daughter who matters more to him than anything, before giving Will an envelope with Charlie's recent photo. Later, Will shows it to Katie, who, through tears, questions how they could be that close without bringing him back and urges Will to free themselves from Snyder's control. Will promises to act when he's ready. The next day, Maddie returns to work but is assigned paperwork duty. Confronting Charlotte, Maddie realizes the maid informed her about the incident. Charlotte coldly reminds Maddie of her place and threatens to withhold her son's insulin if she steps out of line again. Furious, Maddie confronts Nolan, blaming him and demanding that he fix this. Nolan suggests that maybe Charlotte should be forced to face the consequences of her actions, indicating he sees Maddie as a trustworthy and capable partner. At Homeland Security, Bo tells Will that they found plenty of Eric's old fingerprints at the bar, indicating he's been there before. So Will rushes home to show Katie a picture of Eric to see if she recognizes him. Katie says she doesn't know, so Will reveals further evidence that Eric was the one who killed the gateway bombing rebel cell to keep them quiet, along with Phyllis and her husband. Katie is shocked to learn this, so she suggests Eric lives in his mother's house in Hancock Park. Katie goes to the Yonk to meet with Rachel, who reveals that Alexander ordered the bombing that killed the rebels. They agree that he must have ordered the same for Katie. But Rachel then tells her that, since he didn't kill her, Eric has more trust for Katie than loyalty to Alexander. Elsewhere, Will's team tracks down Broussard's address. However, Katie had already warned Eric, and they arrive at an empty house. Will speaks to a neighbor, not knowing it's Alexander, who says he has not seen Broussard. Before leaving, Will recognizes a book. It's the same one he found hidden in Katie's office. Carlos is briefly seen working within the factory. In his cell, he stares out the window, which reveals that the factory is actually on the surface of the moon. Back on Earth, Will shows his kids a photo of Charlie and assures them that he only started working for the government to get him back. Upset that Will didn't discuss this with her first, Katie confronts him. Will simply replies that their family shouldn't have any secrets. Elsewhere, Snyder finds Helena Goldwyn, a higher-up in the Transitional Authority, whom he reports to, waiting in his office. Helena warns Snyder that the Chief Minister of the Pacific Coast is visiting LA on the anniversary of the arrival to give him a performance review. Meanwhile, Katie meets Rachel in the warehouse and learns that her young sons also know that she's in the Resistance. She's impressed with her courage, but still reveals she wants out of the Resistance, fearing for her family. Rachel says she'll talk to Alexander for her. At Homeland Security, Will suddenly receives a mysterious phone call from Alexander, who reveals that his wife is the leak and then provides instructions for a private meeting. Following these directions, Will boards a bus and immediately recognizes one of the passengers as Broussard's neighbor. Alexander confesses that he's the leader of the rebel cell and is willing to betray his cell for the right to leave beyond the wall with a truck of supplies. He'll also keep Katie's collaboration a secret so long as he isn't caught. Will meets with Bo and tells him everything, before visiting Snyder to convey Alexander's conditions, but Snyder demands that they meet face-to-face. Meanwhile, Eric meets with the leader of a younger rebel cell, who informs him about the arrival of an important person. Later that night, Eric meets with Alexander to hand over the operation plan from the other cell. Will returns home, and Katie immediately talks about this morning. But Will shifts the conversation to his meeting with Alexander and how he's ready to betray the entire cell. This leads Katie to quickly leave and use a payphone to warn Eric. They meet behind the Yonk, where Katie informs him of the leader's betrayal. Afterward, Eric confronts Alexander, starting to question him about the situation. However, Alexander demands that Eric cease communication with Katie and focus on preparing for the new operation. Elsewhere, Bram and his teacher use their custom telescope to observe changes on the moon's surface, which they assume must be the aliens' base. The next day, Will takes Snyder to the meeting place with Alexander, who confesses he just wants to survive. He wants an irrevocable transit pass, coded to let him through any wall. In exchange, he'll set up a meeting with Broussard in the other cell where they will be arrested. He also demands that Will escort him out of the colony. Snyder agrees to the deal. Later, Broussard arrives at the designated place in the market, which is being observed by Will's team. Rachel and Katie are also there. Upon spotting some red hats on a roof, Katie immediately warns Broussard and throws firecrackers into the area, causing people to scatter in a panic. Eric escapes, but Rachel is heartlessly gunned down by Captain Lagarza, infuriating Will. Afterward, Jennifer informs Will and the rest about Alexander's identity, along with his past as a former station chief for the CIA, and that Broussard was an informant for him. Will and Bo go to the house where Alexander is being guarded, and the two agree not to let a man who served their country be tortured by the authority. Will tells Alexander that Snyder canceled the deal. He is ready to let him escape and disappear, but first, he asks about Katie. After Alexander reveals that Broussard was the one who recruited Katie, Will kills him to protect Katie's secret, then shoots his two guards once they come running. Bo runs in, quickly understands what happened, and asks what's next. They both agree to blame Broussard for Alexander's death when meeting with Snyder, but he doesn't buy it and threatens them both should this behavior continue. At night, people see the bodies of Rachel and her two sons hanging in public. Katie and Eric meet in the gathered crowd, and Katie promises him her support when the time comes. Later at home, Will tells Katie that she no longer has to worry, since Alexander is now dead and the rebel cell is destroyed. However, Katie continues her act, unaware that Will knows everything. On the 366th day since the arrival, many families gather in the street to release sky lanterns with photos of dead loved ones attached into the air to both remember them and to let them go. Then a group of Red Hats arrives to break up the gathering, but the people resist. Numerous riots spontaneously break out across the city, where many civilians are arrested and multiple Red Hats are killed. The following morning at the crime scene, Bo asserts that people's patience has finally run out. Some of the riots seem coordinated, so he and Will use this to convince Snyder to let them go beyond the wall by claiming a new rebel cell exists outside the colony. Later, Will and Bo are escorted to a road that leads outside the wall by Captain Lagarza and some soldiers. Katie meets with Broussard, and they go to meet the leader of the youth cell. In 2 days, the VIP is supposed to enter the city via the underground metro, which is now used only by the Transitional Authority. Outside the wall, Will and Bo split up from the Red Hats after entering an abandoned skyscraper and go to the top floor. There, they fake a resistance attack to trick the Red Hats, and more specifically, Lagarza, into finding a map that Will planted at the scene. Back at Homeland Security, Snyder is shown the map, which indicates that the 4 largest riots were coordinated. In turn, Snyder reveals that they've found a tunnel beneath the wall, which Will suggests they can use as a trap. After investigating the subway stations, the youth cell shows Katie a micro-drone shaped like a bee that they developed before the arrival, capable of flying anywhere and recording audio. The rebels finalize the attack plan to capture the VIP, who goes by the alias Hyperion. Later, Erect teaches Katie how to properly shoot and tells her to emotionally prepare if she truly plans on choosing to kill. Earlier, Maddie revealed the location of a secret art collection owned by the Mondells to win back Charlotte's good graces. When the collection arrives, Maddie ensures that some paintings aren't officially logged, allowing Charlotte to keep them for herself. The next day, Snyder arrives with Red Hats to confiscate Charlotte's stolen paintings and arrest her, who realizes that Maddie sold her out to the authority as she's being taken away, while Nolan denies any knowledge of Charlotte's actions. Elsewhere, Will and Bo investigate the tunnel under the wall, which could be an even easier way of escaping the colony. That night, Katie prepares her weapon and supplies for the attack. She catches Bram trying to leave with a bag full of flashlights, but she forces him to stay home to watch his sister, as Katie has something important to do. She gives him an emergency number that he must keep secret. Before leaving, Katie catches Grace reading the Greatest Day book, secretly given to her by Lindsay, who says that children like her will be safe as they are their favorites. When Will returns home, Katie immediately tells Will how the church is indoctrinating children to worship the aliens. Will then reveals his plan to have Katie and the family leave the colony to go to Bo's cabin in Big Bear Lake. But when Katie doesn't agree to the plan, Will gets upset and asks Katie how long she's been spying on him. They engage in a loud argument, both trying to justify their actions. When Will tells her he's been truthful all along while Katie has been lying to his face, she brings up the day Will went after Charlie without telling her. She then begs Will to rebel with her, but Will tries to convince her to take the kids and hide with Bo. Katie asserts that there is no hiding and leaves. Neither of them notices Bram listening in to the entire argument. The opportunity is gone, so Will leaves to tell Bo to leave and hide without him. Bo reveals their partnership has given him a new purpose in life, and thanks Will one last time before departing. At the same time, Snyder is shown a proposal by Nolan to replace him, along with a list of Green Zone colonists who support it. The two agree to work together so they can retain their lofty positions. Elsewhere, as the curfew alarm roars, Katie and Erect attack the metro station. Katie kills her first soldier and then questions why his uniform is different from the Red Hats. They then help the other rebels get inside, who quickly set up the bomb that will derail Hyperion's train. They take cover just as the train is about to arrive, and moments later, it triggers the trap, though the explosion is much larger than anticipated. They enter the train to find all the soldiers dead, but in the back of the train car, obscured by flickering lights, the rebels also discover Hyperion, who appears to be an alien inside a special suit. Dozens of people are seen looking through piles of garbage for whatever food might be left. As a man with a large backpack passes through, he is blinded and robbed by 3 children who take his supplies and run away from Red Hat patrols. They hide and look through these stolen goods, finding a revolver among other things. It's revealed that one of the children is Charlie, who leaves to sell off the goods for food. Back in the LA block, Will is awakened when Jennifer comes knocking. She reveals that the resistance has kidnapped a VIP and that Bo wasn't at his house when she checked. Homeland Security has all hands on deck to find the missing VIP, Helena Goldwyn arrives and explains that the missing person is one of the hosts and that she'll be running the operation, not Snyder. She also explains how the city of Dallas was reduced to a flat sheet of glass when 2 hosts were killed there during the arrival. If they don't want the same to happen to LA, they need to find Hyperion quickly. Back underneath the city, the rebels transport Hyperion's body in a truck while debating what to do with the alien. They wrap a device on the alien's wrist in a thermal blanket to block its tracking signal, then hide the body under a tarp so they can move it back to base. Will returns home and finds Maddie. He tells her that all hell is about to break loose, so they need to hide the kids somewhere safe. Maddie says she can hide them in the green zone thanks to her relationship with Nolan. Will finds Bram and asks where Katie is, but when he says he doesn't know, Will can tell he's lying. Bram then reveals the secret number he got from Katie and asks to help find her, but Will tells him to go to the green zone with the others. However, nobody answers Will's calls as the rebels are busy moving the body through the city. Suddenly, the curfew alarm goes off in the middle of the day as the city goes on lockdown. Maddie and the children end up in a huge crowd of people trying to enter the green zone. Maddie is able to gain entry, but turns around to discover Bram has run off. However, it's now or never to enter the zone, so Maddie is forced to go inside with Grace and Hudson. Meanwhile, the rebels hijack a Red Hat car to transport the body. Elsewhere, Snyder goes to a guarded house where it appears only teenagers live and meets with his daughter, Cynthia. He reveals that he's out as proxy, and since things are about to get very bad in the city, he tries to give Cynthia a special transit pass that will let her leave the block for safety. But Cynthia refuses it, saying she wants nothing to do with her father after how he treated her mother. So instead, he just apologizes and leaves. Maddie arrives at Nolan's, and he explains how Snyder is out and that a host has been kidnapped. In the metro station, Jennifer shows Will security footage of Eric and Katie, and Will is determined to find her before anyone else does. While driving through the city, the rebels witness a large gathering of drones suddenly blowing up a building. The younger rebels feel remorse for causing this. Meanwhile, from his office, Snyder watches in horror as the city burns. He asks Helena what will happen to him, but she doesn't answer. The rebels finally get the alien back to their base, which is shielded from any potential surveillance. They debate the deaths of innocent people caused by their actions, but ultimately decide to attempt opening the alien's suit. Back at Homeland Security, Will finally decides to trust Jennifer enough to show her the Resistance codebook. Using the codebook, the database, and security footage from Alexander's betrayal, they identify Simon Eckhart, the leader of the younger rebels, and more importantly, his address. Will asks Jennifer to give him time to save Katie before telling the others, and she reluctantly agrees. Back in the green zone, Snyder hands Nolan a top-secret emergency protocol document that was key to quelling an uprising in the Seattle colony with minimal casualties. He wants Nolan to present it to his boss so he can persuade Helena to, in turn, convince the host to salvage the LA colony. However, Nolan doesn't give a definite answer, leaving Snyder's fate uncertain. After plenty of trial and error, the rebels figure out how to detach the alien's communication device right before Will suddenly bangs on the door. He begs Katie to hand over the host and run before it's too late, but Katie doesn't open the door. When Eric decides to give the rebels more time to examine the body, Katie rips open the Faraday cage, activating the tracker and giving away their location. This forces the rebels to flee immediately. They take the communicator and leave through a secret passageway in the floor. After a tense moment, Eric departs with the others, while Katie stays behind. Outside, Will sees drones beginning to surround the building and rushes to find Katie. When he enters the room, he finally sees the body of the dead host. He stops for a moment to stare in awe as Katie leaves. Not long after, Red Hats and special soldiers arrive to take the body away. Snyder is also there to thank Will, as he unknowingly just saved all their lives. He then gives Will the special transit pass so that he can go and find Charlie. Snyder tells Will he's an honorable man, and they share a genuine moment before Will races off. In the green zone, Nolan tells Maddie that he is the new chief of staff for the next proxy governor. He also informs Maddie that he brought someone to help the kids feel more at home, before revealing that he has invited Lindsay to the house. Elsewhere, Bram takes his teacher through the secret passageway beneath the wall, where they are unexpectedly ambushed and arrested. Snyder spends his final few moments in his office as proxy governor before Captain Lagarza arrives. Snyder expects to walk out, but a Red Hat squad enters behind Lagarza, who then tells Snyder to come with them. Will uses the transit pass to leave the colony and enter the Santa Monica exclusion zone in search of his long-lost son, Charlie. Finally, Katie returns home, only to discover that everyone she loves is gone. As she processes everything, she doesn't realize that a hidden camera is watching her. This concludes the first season of Colony.